G'day guys, this video I'm just going to show you how to use a Victron Multi Control. Now regardless of the exact model you have, they are basically functionally identical, so even if yours doesn't look exactly like this, the video should still apply. As for how you use it, when you're off grid and you're not using any 240 volt power, you're just using your 12 volt, your lights, your pump, all that sort of stuff, you're not trying to use your microwave, etc., you can leave it in the charger only position. This way you're saving power in your battery bank, compared to if you were just leaving it on, it'd be wasting power. So by having it in the charger only position, you won't be able to use any 240 volt power, but it's good for your power consumption. Now, if you want to use 240 volt power when you're off grid, of course, you need to flick it to the on position. That'll allow you to use 240 all around your caravan, your boat, or whatever setup that you have. You have no reason to ever put it in the off position. If it's in the off position, when you go to plug into power or plug your generator in, your charger won't even turn on. So you won't have any power in any of your sockets and you won't be charging your batteries. So when you're not using your system, put it in charger only, and then when you are trying to use your inverter, put it in the on position. That covers the switch. Now let's move on to the control dial. Now, when you're plugging into mains, there's pretty much two ways you can plug in. You either have a 15 amp plug, which is pretty common at caravan parks, I'm sure you've all seen them, but then you often have situations where you need to plug into a 10 amp outlet. And that's when you'll generally use an amphibian adapter or something like that that allows you to turn your 15 amp lead into being able to plug into a 10 amp socket. You can adjust the dial on this unit to make sure that you never ever trip that breaker. Unlike a typical caravan, if you plug in with a 10 amp plug and you use 12 or 13 amps for long enough, what will happen is that breaker will trip, you'll have no power, you're going to have to go out there and walk out and flip the breaker back on. The Victron systems are really smart in the sense that if you set them down to 10 amps, like it is just here, it'll make sure it never takes more than 10 amps from mains. And if your caravan is consuming 12 amps, let's say you're running a high power appliance or maybe two appliances at once, what it'll do is it'll take the 10 amps first and the multi-plus will give you the extra 2. So it's very clever in that regard. If you just leave it set to the typical 16 amp setup, it'll still function, but it means if you pull more than 10 amps, you're just risking tripping a breaker, which isn't a big deal. You can just flick it back on again, but if you know how to use it, it can definitely be very worthwhile when you're out and about. Now the second position is obviously setting it to that 15 amps, and that'll allow you to utilize the full 15 amps of capacity that a caravan park can provide you. So most of the time, that's probably the setting you'll have it on. Alright, now these numbers will change if you plug it into a generator. Of course, they have their own power limitations. So I'm just going to give you some rough rules of thumb, and your mileage may vary depending on the brand of your generator and whatnot, but these numbers will work pretty well for most people. For a 1 kVA generator, you want to be setting your multi-control to about 4 amps. If you find it overloads, you can turn it down a little bit further, and just how much you can adjust this will depend on the size of your system, but see how you go. If you have a particularly large system, you might need to consider running a bigger generator. Now moving on to a 2 kVA generator, they're a super popular unit, and what you probably want to set those to is about 6.5. Once again, if it's overloading, you can turn it down a little bit further, and perhaps you can even try a little bit higher and see how it performs. If it overloads, no big deal. You can generally reset it, restart it, whatever you have to do, and then turn it down a little bit further. Now if you have a 2.5 kVA generator, you can set your figure to about 8.5. Once again, adjust it as you see fit. If you have a 3 kVA generator, 10 amps is a pretty good rule of thumb. As you get larger generators, you can do the math yourself. Otherwise, if you've got the system off us, just ask your installers and they'll fill you in what you should set it to for your generator. Now, if you were listening to that explanation and you went far out, that's way too hard, well, what you can do is you can just set it to 15 amps, and now it's pretty much the same as a regular caravan. However, when you do have a nice high-end Victron power system in there, by learning to use it just a little bit, you'll find that your experience is going to be far better than if you were to just ignore it.